Hey, welcome everybody to the Gray Zone. It's Max Blumenthal. I'm here with Aaron Mate and another expert guest. Today, we have Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector. Probably needs no introduction for our regular viewers, and is someone who brings a wealth of expertise, military expertise, political expertise. He's been in the room. He's jousted with the president, Joe Biden, back when Biden was, I would say, much more articulate. And we're going to just jump right into a discussion of what's happening or what we know about what's happening in the Ukraine-Russia war. Welcome, Scott. I wanted to first ask you, we're hearing a lot of mixed reporting, but generally one side of the narrative, which is echoing kind of the Ukrainian government side in US media, which is that this plucky underdog, David, fighting the Russian Goliath in Ukraine, is holding off the Russian advance around Kiev and is doing serious damage to the Russian military machine in the east. That seems to be different from what I'm seeing on Telegram, including Russian language channels on Telegram, as well as alternative media and what seems to be fairly obvious. But what's your read of what's happening right now? Is Russia winning, or has its strategy completely collapsed?
Well, let me start off with the caveat that unlike apparently the former generals who provide expert opinion on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, I don't have access to the Russian plan.
Yeah.
I mean, I keep hearing that this invasion, this incursion, hasn't gone according to plan. I have yet to see the plan. So I'm operating at a disadvantage there. I can't compare what's happening with the plan that everybody speaks of. I also don't have access to the Russian playbook, because apparently every day I'm told that this is straight out of the Russian playbook. I don't have the Russian plan. I've studied the Russian military for 35 years. I spent a lot of time training to close with and destroy the Soviet military in combat. I think I know a lot about them, but I don't have their playbook. So I'm at a disadvantage again on that. What I can say is I come from the school of interaction with the Russians that uses the concept of trust but verify, meaning that I'm going to listen to what the Russians are saying, and I'm going to go with that until it's been shown to be otherwise. The Russians have said going in that they are not seeking to occupy Ukraine. And this is a huge fact that we need to focus on when we talk about the Russian operation. They are not there to occupy Ukraine. And the configuration of forces sustains this. Normal military math has attackers seeking a 3-to-1 advantage over defenders. So for every Ukrainian out there, you'd like to have 3 Russians lined up against them. The Russians brought together around 200,000 men, spread out over a wide area surrounding Ukraine. The Ukrainians had a standing army of 260,000, highly trained, well-equipped, well-led professional soldiers. And they were backed up by over 330,000 reservists and security forces, police forces, interior troops, etc. So Russia's going into this with a 1-to-3 disadvantage. That is, for every single Russian soldier out there, there's 3 Ukrainian defenders. Now, under normal circumstances, this would be suicide. But you have to listen to what the Russians said. The Russians are not engaged in a battle of territorial acquisition. Normally, when you seek to occupy somebody, you seek to seize territory, hold territory. The territory becomes important. Russia has 2 stated military objectives, the first of which is denazification. That is to destroy the military units that are aligned with neo-Nazi, ultra-nationalist political forces in Ukraine, units like the Azov Battalion, units like the Don Battalion, and others of that ilk. The Russians are seeking them out and destroying them on the field of battle as we speak. The second is demilitarization. That is, Russia has recognized that the Ukrainian military is a de facto proxy of NATO. It has been trained for the past 7 years by U.S. forces, NATO forces at training facilities in Ukraine, training facilities out of Ukraine, to be interoperable with NATO, meaning that you can take a NATO-trained battalion of Ukrainian soldiers, unplug them from Ukraine, plug them into a NATO exercise in Germany, and they'll function seamlessly. They have the same command and control, the same training, the same tactics, etc. Russia views this as a proxy of NATO and has said this must be dismantled. Russia gave the Ukrainian military the opportunity to do this peacefully. Stay in your barracks. We're going to come in and we're going to get rid of all that NATO-provided junk that you were given. It's actually pretty good equipment. But I mean, that's the process of demilitarization. Or you can seek to meet us on the field of battle and we'll do it old school. And unfortunately for both sides, the Ukrainians have chosen old school. Now, what does old school mean? Let's come back to what I said at the beginning. This isn't the Iraqi military. This isn't a military that stood up to the United States in 1991 and got destroyed on the field of battle, annihilated, and then spent the next decade plus unable to reconstitute itself because of economic sanctions, and therefore went up against the world's finest combined arms fighting force in 2003 with nothing, and still put up a pretty good fight, by the way. But my point is, the Ukrainian military is the exact opposite. These are highly trained, highly educated people who have been put through the ropes by their NATO trainers. You know, there's an interesting slide that the Department of Defense put out there. It shows the NATO training facility in Western Ukraine that was bombed the other day. And it says, we train up to 5 Ukrainian battalions a year to NATO standards. And then they have a yellow arrow that goes over here and shows the Donbass so that they can fight the Russians over here. That's 40 battalions trained by NATO for the sole purpose of killing Russians in Donbass.
This is the base that's referred to kind of as the International Peacekeeping Center that was close to the Polish border, where possibly 100 foreign fighters from the so-called Foreign Legion were killed that you're referring to. But what Russia has maintained, and what was pretty apparent, was that this was a de facto NATO base inside Ukraine, which is technically not a member of NATO. So you're talking about de facto NATOization being the main factor in this war.
Absolutely. It's the ultimate objective. I mean, Russia, this war was predicated by NATO's appetite for Eastern expansion, the expansion eastward to include Ukraine. Russia has long said this is a red line. William Burns, the former U.S. ambassador, wrote a memo after the 2008 Bucharest conference that formally invited Ukraine and Georgia that said "niet" means "niet," no means no. And he accurately outlined the Russian objectives. He said these objectives actually are solid, meaning they're not fanciful. We have to take this seriously. And he said, and this was written, I believe, in February of 2009, he said, if we fail to respect the Russian position, they will eventually be compelled to take military action that will destroy Ukraine, and Ukraine will lose Crimea and the Donbass as a result. Now, this is before 2014, before the annexation of Crimea became reality, before Russian separatists decided to peel away the Donbass. In 2009, it was recognized that Ukraine has a Russian Achilles heel, the Donbass and Crimea, that it's going to lose if it tries to join NATO, and in the process, it will be destroyed. A U.S. ambassador, who is today, by the way, a well-respected director of the CIA. So this isn't some has-been. This isn't Michael McFaul or somebody of this nature. This is a guy who still has cards in the game, chips. He's playing with real chips. Said we have to take this seriously, and we didn't. We expanded. No means no, and we're finding out what the Russian definition of no is today. And no is we're going to go in and we're going to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine for the purpose of achieving Ukrainian neutrality, which is the political objective, the ultimate political objective. Russia is winning this fight. people say, well,
I just wanted to share something before I toss to Aaron, based on your comments about the International Peacekeeping Center, which is obviously a ridiculous name for the base, but this is this is the International Peacekeeping and Security Center in Ukraine. Before Russia struck it, our colleague Alex Rubinstein tweeted this. Here's a Ukrainian soldier training with 2 American soldiers at the base, because it is effectively a NATO base, and they're both Black American soldiers. And the trainee geotagged himself Zimbabwe to mock the race of the Black soldiers, and then he posted 1488, referring to the 14 words of the dead neo-Nazi, American neo-Nazi David Lane, and 88, which stands for Heil Hitler. So this is kind of what's going on at the base, since you also mentioned denazification. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, I have a clip I want to play of Zelensky talking about what you just talked about, Scott, and get your response to it. This is Zelensky on Sunday speaking to Fareed Zakaria, and he kind of gave away the game when it comes to the role of NATO expansion here. Listen to what he said.
Requested them personally to say directly that we are going to accept you into NATO in a year or 2 or 5. Just say it directly and clearly, or just say no. And the response was very clear. You're not going to be a NATO or EU member, but publicly the doors will remain open. Requested them personally to take.
So just to repeat that's Zelensky saying that I asked NATO, presumably he means the U.S., for a direct answer on whether or not Ukraine will be admitted. And what he was told is that you will never join NATO, but publicly the doors will remain open. I'm wondering, Scott, your reaction to that.
Well, you know, this isn't the first time that this has happened. One goes back to 2008 and the decision by Mikhail Saakashvili, the president of Georgia, to launch a military incursion into South Ossetia, which from a Georgian perspective is a Georgian republic, and to return this territory to Georgian sovereign control. He had been in negotiations with the United States about this, with Susan Rice, who at the time I believe was either the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of State, or not Susan Rice, Condi Rice. And from his perspective, he was told that the U.S. is going to be there for him, that NATO will be. And he went in and found out the hard way that, no, they aren't there for you. And his military got smashed around a little bit. And, you know, it cost him a lot. He later humiliated Miss Rice in person when she came to visit, where he called her out. There's a videotape where he said, "You told me you'd be there. We went in because you told me you'd be there, and you abandoned us." And she was embarrassed by this. But the point is, why would Saakashvili believe this when there's no doubt in my mind that the U.S. said, you know, we're not going to be there for you? Well, the reason why he believed that is because prior to this, the United States military was in Georgia training the Georgian military to U.S. and NATO standards. The Georgians were deploying forces into Iraq. In fact, when that war happened, they had an entire brigade of U.S. trained forces, their best forces in Iraq, that they had to bring back to try and defend Tbilisi if the Russians went on. They went into Afghanistan. Georgians have died in both conflicts. And the Georgians believe that, yeah, we paid a blood price. And therefore, our fellow warriors who we train with are never going to abandon us. And you know, that's not an unfounded thought. When you train this close, this intense with American service members, you get good ties with them. But these guys don't understand that the American service members have no say when it comes to policy. That they might be well-meaning when they talk about how there's a military brotherhood. They don't get to decide whether or not they go in and defend you. And there's no doubt in my mind that Zelensky was operating under the same thing, where his military guys were saying, man, we are so tight with the Americans. We train like this. We're brothers. And, you know, they're not going to abandon us. Our brothers would never abandon us. They told me, we will be there for you. Zelensky went, all right, let's push this thing. Let's let the Russians come in. Let's sucker them in. And then everybody will come to our assistance, because that's what brothers do. Well, no, the military doesn't get to make the call. The politicians do. And Zelensky has learned the Saakashvili, rule. never trust the Americans, because the Americans will never be there for you. It's something that Ashraf Ghani learned in Afghanistan as well.
Well, what is the U.S. NATO politicians' motive in saying to Zelensky, "You're never going to get in, but publicly we're going to leave the door open. Thereby, we're never going to agree to the key Russian demand that could have prevented this war"?
You just hit it on the head. We are not going to be seen as giving in to Russia. And now you ask yourself, well, isn't that sort of stupid to talk about, tension in perpetuity? I think in 2019, Rand Corporation published a study that listed, I think, 7 destabilizing factors. Now, before I go into this, understand that Rand just doesn't gin up studies on its own. That's not how think tank business works. The think tank business works because somebody in the Department of Defense or the Department of State said, we want you to write a study about a very pressing policy problem. How do we destabilize Russia? And so they wrote it and said, these are the top things. The number one thing, Ukraine. Number one, overextending, unbalancing Russia. There it is. And the number one thing on the list was Ukraine. Ukraine is the trap, so to speak. There's so many Americans today that think they can recreate Afghanistan in Ukraine, to suck Russia into a conflict in Ukraine that will destroy Russia the way Afghanistan destroyed the Soviet Union. Because at the end of the day, we need to understand that the policy of the United States towards Russia has been, since Michael McFaul became Obama's Russia expert on the National Security Council, regime change. And when I say regime change, I mean get rid of Vladimir Putin. If you go back and take a look at the reset policy, remember that embarrassing red button that they pushed that was spelled wrong, meant something totally different? That was about empowering Dmitry Medvedev, who had taken over as president from Putin. Putin had been relegated to prime minister because of constitutional issues. These idiots actually thought that Medvedev was a real president. And they thought that if they went in there and suddenly opened up the floodgates in terms of supporting Russia, doing what Russia wants, working with Russia, being a partner with Russia, that the Russian people would say, Dmitry Medvedev, who nobody knows anything about, by the way, just sort of thrown in here to be president, and everybody understood what the deal was. There's not a single Russian alive who didn't know what the deal was. But the Americans apparently didn't know what the deal was, and we were trying to empower Medvedev to stab Putin in the back. And we saw how that worked. When the time came, Medvedev saluted smartly, took 3 steps backwards, and Putin resumed his position as president of Russia. But Putin knew, because look at how mad the United States was. Hillary Clinton went on the offensive. Remember in the election, I think it was December of 2011, where she was encouraging people to rise up in the streets to disrupt the election, to overthrow Putin. The United States was just furious about it. And what did this lead to? This led to Maidan. You say, well, that's Ukraine. Ukraine has always been the keystone to the American concept of destabilizing Russia. Ukraine has been the keystone. And you know what? You reap the wind, or you sow the wind, you reap the whirlwind. And we're reaping the whirlwind right now because Russia didn't take the bait, they reversed the bait. I mean, everything Russia is doing right now is a clear indication, at least from my assessment, that they have recognized this trap for years, and they have built the game, positioned themselves so that it's not them who have been sucked into a trap. It is NATO who sucked into a trap. You want to know the proof? Look at NATO's panic meeting today. Panic meeting. They talk about NATO unity. There is no NATO unity. NATO is a scared organization right now that doesn't know what to do. And then Russia just upped the ante, because this isn't just about the military. There's this whole economic aspect to it. Remember how Joe Biden bragged about staring Putin in the eyes? Remember the hardened killer that he was? And he said, if you invade Ukraine, we will impose the world's greatest stringent, massive economic program. And he sort of hinted at what they're going to do. We're going to cut you off from SWIFT. We're going to seize your assets. We're going to do all this. And Putin went, all right, thanks. Then Putin went back to Moscow and said, all right, we got their game plan. What do we do? And they built a game plan And they just played a big card today. Did you see what Putin did?
He's
Gas.
declaring that the EU will have to buy gas and oil in rubles. And that is just massive. It's like you will freeze if you don't buy it in rubles. And also
you'll starve to death. Everything you think you enjoy in life, this wonderful Western lifestyle that you have, is gone. Goodbye, do svidanya. Because once again, the Americans lied to Europe. Remember Biden telling everybody, we got a plan, guys. We got a plan. Don't worry about gas. We'll get you all the gas you need. Don't worry about oil. We'll get you all the oil you need. And then when the time came, the Americans went, yeah, no, I'm sorry, we don't have a plan. There isn't any oil. There isn't any gas. America's running around right now in Operation Tin Cup, going on their knees to Venezuela. I mean, to Venezuela. To Nicolas Maduro, who we tried several times to overthrow with a coup, and then we embarrassingly appoint Juan Guaido as president. We then send James Story, the poor ambassador that's in the middle of this, crawling on his knees saying, we need your oil.
Yeah.
Maduro's considering right now, but he's not playing this game. Iran. This Iran nuclear deal was dead in the water. We weren't going anywhere with this. Sunset clauses, malign activity, ballistic missiles, all these
worst terrorists in the world.
You are the worst people in the world, the scum of the earth. We're never oil. Yeah, boys, let's lock this deal down. We're in. Yeah. We're in, all in. You blew up a Saudi Arabia Aramco facility. Shame on you, but we're still in. Well,
and they're now saying they'll remove the IRGC from the State Department terror list. Amazing.
No, they're not terrorists anymore. Don't worry about it. We're all in because we need your oil. We don't have a plan B. Algeria, gas. Nope, they ain't selling gas. Nobody's selling gas. And if they do sell gas, it's not going to be enough. Germany right now, I won't use the terms that I wanted to use. They're doing something to a brick. Okay, it's they're defecating a brick because they recognize that it's all over. France, it's all over.
And what was the point of Scott? What was the point of sanctioning Russia's central bank if they're not going to be allowed to? If they're not going to be forced to default on their loans? Like that's not happening.
We're the dumbest people in the world. That's why. I mean, literally, I can't think of anybody dumber than the head of the Office of Foreign Asset Control or the Sanctions Department in the Department of Treasury. First of all, they don't know anything about economists. These are people who are picked. All these people right now in the U.S. government that are advising, Biden and company on Russia aren't Russian experts. That's the first thing we have to understand. We got rid of the last Russian experts years ago. We've replaced them with ideologues who have bought into this politicized notion of autocrats, of dictatorships. Look at I've studied the PhD theses of every single one of these idiots up there. And every single one of them are written about how evil Vladimir Putin is. You can't get into the U.S. government today, whether it's the CIA, the State Department, anywhere, unless you've published something that says Vladimir Putin is evil. If you've done that, you're brought into the club. These are people who don't know Russia, don't know Russian history, don't have an appreciation of Russian culture, and they darn sure can't think like a Russian. And so they've come up with this stupidity of we're going to seize Russia's sovereign wealth fund. And no one ever for once said, what are the Russians going to do? I mean, the first question I would have asked is, why is Russia keeping their sovereign wealth fund in foreign banks that can be frozen? Isn't this a little too, I mean, in the military, they teach you, if everything's going the way you think it's supposed to go, it's an ambush. Stop. Because nothing's supposed to be easy. If the Russians have made it this easy, there's a problem. And what they did is now Russia went, by seizing our assets, you have defaulted to Russia. And therefore, you will now buy everything in Russian rubles. Game over. It's literally game over because the U.S. doesn't have a plan B. We don't have people who went, hey, we were expecting that move, and here's our counter move. Right now, we have people going, hey, they can't do that, can they? They can't do that. Well, Germany's going to find out because Germany's going to say, well, we don't want to. And the rest of it, then you don't get any gas. And then all the German companies shut down. Michelin tires, they shut down. They can't afford to stay open. As the price of energy goes up, the economy of Europe is going to collapse, literally collapse. And Europe is a heavily subsidized so is the social contract between the electorate and the elected is heavily subsidized. I mean, there's a lot of bribery going on in the form of government subsidies. Those government subsidies are going to disappear. And the first thing I've learned in a democracy is when you irritate the constituent, you tend not to stay in office very long. And because most of these places are parliamentary in nature, they can have votes of no confidence. I mean, in the United States, we're stuck with Biden. You either impeach him or you're in for the 4-year ride. In Europe, a vote of no confidence. And trust me, there's going to be a lot of no confidence going on this summer. A lot.
Yeah, people in the U.S. only get to wave "Let's go Brandon" flags. There's no votes of no confidence. But Aaron, you wanted to, I'm sure there's the confidence just overflowing for Olaf Scholz in Germany after his Munich speech and what he did there. They're going to be really happy next winter. Aaron, you wanted to throw out the clip on.
Well, yeah, there's a headline today in the Financial Times. Olaf Scholz warns immediate Russian energy ban would trigger recession in Europe. So I'm wondering, Scott, where you think that leads, the fact that politicians in Europe like Olaf Scholz are dealing with the consequences of this, what position that puts them in, and then how that will impact the outcome of the war in Ukraine.
Well, Russia's been extremely smart in not shutting off the spigots. I thought that maybe one of the first cards they play would be to just shut it all down and get the immediate impact on that. But Vladimir Putin is a patient man. And he has done what, a lot of people were talking about before this, that, Russia plays the energy card. They weaponize energy. I think history is going to show that Russia didn't weaponize anything. The West weaponized energy. And all Russia's done is play that game. They didn't start this fight, but they're going to finish this fight. These European countries that are so important to this sanctions program are now in a they're caught between the horns of a dilemma. They either continue to support the sanctions, and Russia will say you've defaulted, and we now are shutting off the gas, not because we want to shut it off, but because you're not paying, and then that's imminent, as the German chancellor has noted, imminent economic collapse. Or we got to go and we got to crawl to the Russian market and we got to start buying rubles so we can pay for gas. And in doing so, we empower the ruble. I mean, just take a look at what the ruble's doing today. A couple, was it a week ago? It was 140 rubles to the dollar. Today, I think it's down to 87 and dropping. At this rate, I'm going to have my relatives send me rubles instead of me sending them dollars. The ruble is going to be worth so much. But this is a lose-lose proposition for Europe. And in the end, they're going to pick the loss that causes sanctions to collapse, because no politician willingly commits political suicide. And to continue supporting sanctions that will result in the economic demise violates James Carville's #1 rule of politics. It's the economy, stupid. And they're all about to learn that this is the biggest truth there is right now. So, and Putin timed this perfectly, because as we're speaking, there's an emergency summit in Brussels where NATO is getting together to discuss some pretty dangerous things, like Poland saying, we want to send a peacekeeping force into Western Ukraine. Now, this is predictable. I predicted this a week ago. You're going to have, as soon as that refugee threshold reaches around 6 to 7 million, you've saturated Europe. They can't take any more. And they're going to keep coming. 10 million, 12 million, 15 million, depending on what Russia does next, 20 million. And they're going to be piling into Europe, and Europe can't handle it. So Europe's going to demand some sort of refugee safety zone on the Ukrainian side of the border, where they can build these camps, supply these people. But in order to do that, the Poles want to project a peacekeeping force in there to secure that. This peacekeeping force will be immediately engaged and destroyed by the Russians. It will have literally no chance of survival. Now people say, well, that's all about nuclear war. No. As Peskov said last night in his interview with Christiane Amanpour on CNN, Russia has published, and I've read it, I've written about it, a nuclear posture review. And in the nuclear posture review, Russia is very specific about the conditions under which nuclear weapons will be employed. Most of them involve people using nuclear weapons against Russia. But there is one, for instance, when conventional forces attack Russia in a way that threatens the existential survival of Russia. And if that's the case, Russia would respond with nuclear weapons. Now, this is generally thought to mean that if NATO puts 400,000 troops in the Baltics and then they launch an attack against St. Petersburg and are driving down on Moscow, that this would be an existential threat and Russia would use nuclear weapons. What it doesn't mean is a tank battle on the plains of Ukraine. Russia ain't going to war over the Ukraine, and not a nuclear war. Russia is more than ready to take NATO on and crush them. You know, one of the reasons why Russia is having a hard time against the Ukrainians is that they don't want to annihilate them. Trust me, if the Russians wanted to kill these Ukrainians in the numbers necessary to bring about their immediate demise, they would apply, for instance, a massive barrage of thermobaric weapons on the Ukrainian positions, sucking the literal life out of every one of their lungs, and then they would roll over them. But Russia's not doing that. Russia's doing intense infantry fighting that's costing Russia a lot of casualties. They lose a lot of their advantages. If Russia goes to war against NATO, the gloves are off, man. It's hardcore, bare fist war. And Russia deployed a new weapon this week, the Kinzhal. And people are like, well, why did he use the Kinzhal? Well, the reason why they used the Kinzhal isn't because they were trying to intimidate Ukraine. Trust me, Zelensky's plenty intimidated right now. You don't need the Kinzhal to do it. They didn't do it to strike a target that couldn't be struck by any other weapon. The Caliber cruise missile has shown itself to be very effective at taking out sites. They deployed it to show to NATO that this is what happens. Remember, everybody took, when Putin said, if you get involved in Ukraine, you will pay a price that you have never paid before. And everybody went, oh my God, he's threatening nuclear war. Nope. He's threatening to introduce you to Mr. Kinzhal, who will come in and take out NATO headquarters, come in and take out the British Ministry of Defense headquarters, take out the French Defense headquarters, take out all of NATO's headquarters, because nothing can stop it. Nothing can stop it. And that was the point they were making. Hey guys, we're going to fire this. Got all your radars turned on? Look at it, think about it, chew on it. Because if you want a war with Russia, this is coming. And you got nothing. You got nothing to stop it.
One thing we're hearing from Brussels, Scott, is this escalating fear-mongering about Russia using chemical weapons. The NATO Secretary General warned about this today. Joe Biden is now talking about it. A number of NATO officials are talking about it. I'm wondering what you make of this. All of a sudden, we're getting these claims coming from NATO that they have intelligence of Russia possibly plotting chemical weapons attacks inside Ukraine.
Well, let's start with the obvious. For Russia, let's hypothetically say that Russia has a weaponized chemical weapons capability or biological weapons capability. Russia knows that they cross that line, they're changing the dynamic of their Ukrainian gambit. Russia went into Ukraine not just to get Ukrainian neutrality, not just to denazify, not just to demilitarize, but to redefine the European security framework. And in order to redefine it in a way that is conducive to a Russian outcome, you need to create the condition where NATO starts to question itself, starts to question its own viability, question the cost of maintaining its current posture, etc. So it's counterintuitive for Russia to use weapons that would only bring NATO together. And it's even more counterintuitive for Russia to use these weapons when Russia is winning. So why is NATO saying what they're saying? We'll start with the obvious one. NATO, or the United States, got caught out with these biological research facilities. I mean, I've been aware of these. I know I know the guys who ran program managers. These are not new to me. And I've always talked to them about, what's going on here? What's really going on here? Why do you need these biological research facilities in Ukraine? I understand the need to capture former Soviet biological warfare capability, to account for and dispose of former Soviet biological weapons pathogens that might have been retained, and to provide gainful employment to these scientists so they don't go sell their skill set to North Korea, Iran, any other so-called rogue actor that might be in the market. I don't think Iran's in the market. I don't know what North Korea is doing. This is a purely hypothetical statement. But the point is, I understand all that. I also understand that you might want to build a modern level 3 research facility to provide capabilities that can't be found in the existing Soviet era facilities. But 26? Why do you need 26? What is the purpose of these? So now the US does the old game. The Russians are only accusing us because they're planning to use biological weapons themselves. I mean, that's the extent of the intelligence. I can tell you right now, we are not sitting on communications intercepts that show that the Russians are preparing. This is somebody in the United States saying, well, if the Russians are saying this, what do you think that really means? And you have some intelligence analyst who hasn't been schooled on the reality of Russia, but instead been schooled to hate Putin, saying, well, if I were Vladimir Putin, that would mean that I'm planning a biological weapon because it's a page straight out of the Russian playbook. And I have insight into Vladimir Putin's plan. No, there is no biological plan. And the same now applies because now we're talking about a hypothetical biological weapons attack. We have to throw in, of course, Novichok and Skripal and Navalny. We have to take two cases that have been made against Russia and say they are known purveyors of chemical warfare. And then we also have to bring in the Syrian playbook, and bring back, Khan Shakun and Duma and all these other places and say they did it in Syria. Well, they didn't do it in Syria. Who knows what happened with Skripals? Who knows what happened with Navalny? But they aren't part of a military weaponized chemical warfare program. This literally is manufactured clickbait by the United States government. There's no truth to it, none whatsoever.
And I'm wondering if you think, is part of the motive here, just like in Syria with the Syria playbook, to preserve the option of NATO military force? Because that's what part of the agenda was with Syria and the Red Line in back in 2013. And it was only actually undermined, or it was partly undermined by other people inside the Obama White House who knew that the intelligence was not there, that Syria was guilty. That's why James Clapper went to Obama and said it's not a slam dunk, deliberately choosing his words to invoke the Iraq War WMD claims of George Tenet. And they helped undermine Obama's claim. And we later learned from Seymour Hersh, there was a whole bunch of other evidence pointing to sarin actually having been used by the rebels. But there were people inside the Obama White House who did want to preserve the option for greater military intervention in Syria. And the chemical weapons allegation was the way to advance that. I'm wondering if you see a repeat here as well.
I can say that I have confidence in the senior military leadership that they know what the truth is. I have confidence in the senior intelligence community leadership that they know what the truth is, and that they will bend backwards to ensure that the political appointee advisors to Biden aren't allowed to manufacture a case for military intervention based upon fabricated intelligence.
Just like what happened in Syria.
It's a repeat of that. Now, but there's another factor here, because that's a U.S. only dynamic. What we have right now is this, and again, I wrote about this a while back. I wrote an article called "The Article 4 Trap," and I talked about how dangerous. Everybody talks about Article 5, collective defense of NATO. That's a nothing article. First of all, it means nothing. everybody keeps talking about collective defense. There is no collective defense. Read the article. It says if one nation is attacked by another, that all nations must consult on what they want to do. And if they want to do something, and it doesn't have to be military, then they work with others to do it. There's no automatic, oh, you attack Poland, we automatically go to war. No, that's not how Article 5 works. Article 4, though, is the one that actually got NATO involved in Serbia, the one that got NATO involved in Libya, got NATO involved in Iraq, one that got NATO involved in Afghanistan. Article 4 is the consultation article, and it's already been invoked. Poland and the Baltics have invoked an Article 4 consultation a while back when Russia first went into Ukraine to get NATO engaged on this threat to Polish security and Baltic security that now exists in Ukraine. So they've been having ongoing Article 4 talks. And right now, Poland is hyping up the threat posed by Russia and the danger of the United States politically committing to a narrative such as chemical weapons, biological weapons, whatever, is that politically it's hard for them to back down. It's one thing to have a general go to the White House and whisper in the president's ear that this is a load of garbage. It's another thing for the president to be in Brussels, having committed to this narrative, and then being confronted by fellow NATO members saying, man, Russia's such a big deal. We have no choice now but to put a peacekeeping force into Western Ukraine. And so there's the danger that the United States may be getting caught in a trap of its own making, boxed into a corner based upon its own rhetoric. And we're just living in a very dangerous time. This is, we're fraught with uncertainty. The only thing that is certain, in my opinion, is the Russians are winning this war, and they're winning it in a big way.
Yeah, I mean, what the other common factor or common thread between Syria and Ukraine is you have a very weakened U.S.-backed fighting force on the ground, which is itself governed by elements that are far more extreme than those in the Biden White House who don't want a direct confrontation with Russia, and so they're pulling out all the stops. I mean, I wrote about how the supposed theater bombing in Mariupol was pretty obviously a staged event. It was controlled by the Azov battalion. I mean, these are the Ukrainian analog to the jihadist Al-Qaeda elements in Syria, and they're willing to do pretty much anything to get some emotional, dramatic event to stir up public pressure for intervention. In this case, though, it seems like they just let everyone go. They only had a few civilians there. Nobody was killed or injured, apparently. And Western media has kind of let it go after blaming Russia, and they're moving on to the next thing. And it is disturbing that Biden and company are warning of an imminent Russian chemical attack. I think that goes hand in hand with this narrative that Russia's actually losing and getting desperate. They need to create the perception that Russia actually would do something that is in fact against its best interests, not only militarily, but politically as well. And I'm also hearing some rumors, the theater bombing was forecast by a Russian reporter, citing local Mariupol residents. He first said that there is a Turkish-built mosque in Mariupol that is being, that there will be a false flag there. We found out that the claims that it was shelled were false soon after, and that in the coming days, there will be an attack on this theater. Now, what I'm hearing from similar sources is a potential attack on U.S. personnel, U.S. diplomats in Lvov, which is extremely troubling. We could see something other than a chemical attack in the coming days. But the clear agenda of Ukrainian forces, and particularly the paramilitaries, does seem to be something to trigger greater involvement of the U.S. or an escalation. You don't think Nuland and her clique want to go further than Biden and the military do?
Oh, she does. There's no doubt in my mind that Nuland wants to go further. I just don't think she has that much power. I think Nuland's, she's at the pinnacle of where she's at. The person that has the most power, I believe, of all the Russia whisperers right now is William Burns. And that's why we're not hearing anything about it. I think William Burns is working overtime behind the scenes working our back channel, trying to come up with some sort of off-ramp to avoid unnecessary conflict. Look, this is the last place Joe Biden wants. Joe Biden doesn't want to be in Brussels. Joe Biden wants to be in Tokyo. Joe Biden wants to be in Seoul. Joe Biden wants to be in Manila. Joe Biden wants to be in Beijing. Joe Biden wants to be in the Pacific, because that's where the future of America lies. That's the economic future. At least that's what it used to be before we allowed Russia to disrupt the petrodollar. Now the future is in Moscow. The whole world's gravitating to Moscow right now. The Moscow-Beijing axis is becoming, a very real thing. And it's going to be an equal axis, because Russia is the world's #2 supplier of energy. And if the ruble becomes a currency of choice in the trade of energy, Russia becomes I'm not going to say an economic superpower, but everybody keeps saying, no, they got a GDP of less than Italy. Well, they're going to have a GDP that's greater than the EU if this trend continues. So, this is the last place Biden wants to be. Nobody in his administration wanted to be here. Maybe Newland did. Maybe Newland wanted to be, but nobody else. And yet here they are, trapped in Europe, trapped in a quagmire of their own making, because they were too stupid to understand that Russia was serious. I mean, this is really what happens when you allow a bunch of academics who focused on the fantasy of Putin to run policy and ignore the reality of Russia.